All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome back. We're continuing our journey upward, Bezrat Hashem. We're now in the Chelik HaChasidus. Chasidus is the second part of the Sefer, as we've said many times before, the level which goes beyond what a Jew is expected to do, beyond that to the level of what a person could do and should try to do, to reach beyond the level of just the basic obligations that a person has. So we're in the middle of discussing various elements of Chasidus with regard to Bein Adam Lechavero, with regard to a person and his fellow. I think I'm correct in saying Rabbi Chunya. We got to Rabbi Nechunya. So they said the Rabbi Chunya, Bama harachta yomim. How his Talmidim asked him, how come you had such a long life? Amalhem miyomai lo niskabdi bekoilon chaveri. I never derived honor at the expense of somebody else's disgrace. Also al mitosi klilas chaveri. And I never took up to my bed the curse of my friend, meaning he was always the second one. He was always moichel. Before he went to bed, even if somebody did something wrong to him, even if he cursed him, he would let it go. The first part of that, he never derived honor. So the expression of that is, an example of that is, Mafarish hasim ki hu derav huna, dorimara akafte. He saw a friend of his coming along, and which was Rab Chana bar Chanilai, and he took Rav Huna's axe that he'd been carrying on his shoulder. And Rav Huna said to him, would you normally carry an axe? Is that something which would be considered to be commensurate with your dignity? Maybe that's something you wouldn't do normally and you're just doing that for me. Because if it is, then it's something I don't want to derive the honor, so to speak, of you carrying my axe to me if that's not something you normally do, that you're demeaning yourself by behaving in a fashion that you wouldn't normally do so. As he said, if it's customary for you to carry it, then where you come from, then you can carry it, but if not, it's no wish that I have to gain honor through your dishonor. So, and he says there that even though the disgrace, the koloin of his friend, of his chava, implies a conscious attempt to increase one's honor. And that's the obvious meaning, to, so to speak, to rise up and get covered and respect and honor as a result of somebody else's disparagement, being brought down. But that's not all. That's the point here. The point is that even though there was no conscious idea to increase one's own honor at the expense of somebody else, someone who is a chassid on the level of chasidus will shun the situation of acquiring honor through the honor of their friends, even if the latter would be quite agreeable to do so. As in this case, where clearly it was that Rav Huna was perfectly happy for Rab Chanilai to do that, but he asked him, is this something that you would normally do? If not, I don't want to know any part of it. There's a lovely story that I found here, which is that he says this is the Sefer of Rav Segel, Don Segel. First what he says, we see here, B'divrei Mesilas Yesharim, the definition of Chasidus is that even in a situation which al pi halacha, something would be mutter. For example, in a situation where a person's friend comes by himself and he's moda, he wants the person to do this thing, as we see. We see v'chochem shemochel al kavodo mochel. That's the Gemara in Kedushin. A Chochem is in a position, if he wants to be moichel, to, how do you say in English, to give way, to not to stand on his honor, to let it go, to do something or let somebody else do something which would maybe not necessarily on the level of the honor required to give him. Mikol Mokum, Mishnas Chasidim hi shelo lahikanes liskabed kololo. That's the idea of the Chasidus, that even it's how do you say, agreeable to the person. V'hainu shehalacha hi etzam hadavar. He says a beautiful idea here. The halacha is the bone of the matter, so to speak, the flesh and bone. And the Chasidus is the ruach hadavarim, is the spirit behind things. So the idea of Chasidus in this case is to enter into the spirit behind the flesh and blood of the halacha, to understand the spirit in which it's given, and to extrapolate into areas which would not normally be considered to be necessary. Lifnim mishuras adin, well within the boundary of what's considered the law. The Das Masha Kodesh Baruch Hu wrote to understand what it is. Of course, every mitzvah, and he said this before, that Hashem gives us, is a, so to speak, a body, is a certain goof. And behind that, a chochem can extrapolate, can understand. Of course, has to be within the gedder of the mitzvah. We don't want to end up in the realm of Baal Tosif. We're not allowed to add mitzvahs to the Torah. But within the parameters of that mitzvah, to understand as much as a person is humanly possible, to understand the soul of the mitzvah, the ruach of the mitzvah, what is being expressed here, what is the rotzen of Hashem that is fleshed out in this mitzvah, that I can enter into its spirit, and that's what we're talking about in terms of the Chasidus. That's what Rav Segel is saying here. Now he brings a beautiful story. I'll read it a bit in Hebrew. Rav Shalom Shvadron is a very famous Magid, a inspirational speaker you call him nowadays, but a Magid, somebody who would tell stories and inspire people, called Rav Shalom Shvadron Litzasal, passed away a few years ago. He used to be to daven for the Omid. He would be the chazan at Chevron, which is a very large yeshiva, even bigger now, Plian Hora. He was the Baal Tefillah. He was the chazan on the Yomim Noroim for many, many years. And one time it was that in the middle of the Tefillah, he started to sing Ulanagain, Nigunim, Ha'arich Behem, and he would do all these tunes and everything in the middle of the Tefillah, where he'd never done this any of the years before. He went into these long sort of tunes without saying any of the words, and he went on a very, very long time, which was not his custom. So the Bnei Yeshiva didn't understand why it was that he was doing this, why he was singing all these nigunim and carrying on for this and schlepping out, so to speak, the tefillah. Afterwards, it became clear that in the Daled Amos of Rav Shalom Shvadron, when he was davening for the Omid, there was an elderly gentleman that, because of the weakness of his body, was not able to control the air that came out of his body. And it therefore was asa for Rav Shalom Shvadron to carry on davening. And so Rabbi Shalom didn't want to say anything to this elderly gentleman. So what he did was he kind of covered up the fact that he couldn't carry on davening by extending all these chants and songs. Yeah. Until so it says at the end here, Vaya nichale she yachshavuhu l'meshuna, until this person understood what he was doing was somewhat strange. Until the end, man dahu havin ma'ira. So I don't know if he, the elderly gentleman himself, understood it, but everybody understood what it was that he was doing, and he didn't want to embarrass this fellow. Okay, so that's an example of how, even in a situation where halachically it would be mutter to probably say something, he didn't want to in any way dishonor him. Yeah. The next thing we're going to talk about is next idea of Chassidus. B'inyan zeh amar Rabbi Zera, miyamai lo hikpadati b'soch beisi. I never got, bothered or annoyed by what happened at home. Now, of course, we're not just talking about, he didn't shout at the members of his household. I think anybody, all of us at some point in our lives have had situations at home, be it with our siblings or our spouse or our parents, where it's been very difficult to control ourselves and not to get into arguments and not to shout. He's not talking about shouting. He's saying that he never got upset with anybody. He never got upset. He was never makpid. Makpid doesn't clearly means that he expressed it. It just is an internal feeling of it's an incredibly high level, because I think we all understand how easy it is. And how did he do this? So I saw here, he said a very beautiful idea. Why do people get angry? What's the basis of anger? The basis of anger is covered. The basis of anger is that people should be doing what I think they should be doing, and if they're not doing it, then it's an insult to me. It's me. When a person understands that he's not the center of the world, that Hashem is the center of the world, and that everything that is happening is because Hashem wants it to happen that way, it's much easier for him to control himself. He removes his ego from the situation. Okay, my teenage son is screaming at me, or my father's screaming at me, put whatever it is, or I'm sorry, no, I didn't mean that. Or they're doing something that's really annoying, something that I've asked somebody to not do a dozen times and they're still doing it. So if I understand this is a particular nisoyan which is uniquely built for me in this particular situation, this is coming from Hashem. If a person goes through his life realizing, you see, all of these things, it's like, when you say it as I'm saying it now, everybody knows these things to be true. If I were to ask any of you, is everything coming from Hashem? You say, yeah, of course, yeah. The thing is that it's one thing to have that as an intellectual concept. It's another thing to live by that. Being a Jew consists of two parts. Number one, a person has to know things. Another thing is that a person has to live within that knowledge. It's not enough just to intellectually understand there's a God. It's not enough just to intellectually understand that he is all-powerful. It's not enough to intellectually understand that nothing happens without him wanting it to happen. A person has to live within the framework of that reality. And of course, that only comes with a lot of work, a lot of musa, a lot of exercises, a lot of thought, a lot of spending time to internalize these ideas to the point that they become more instinctive. But really that's what he's saying, that a person who internalizes that idea, it's not just he doesn't shout, he doesn't get angry. He's not makpid with anybody in his home. And I think maybe the reason the Sinclair chose the background of talking about a person's house and his home is because that's probably the arena where a person is most likely to get into anger. Usually if you want to see who somebody really is, have a look at what he's like with his family. How does he treat his wife? How does he treat his children? That's really the way a person really is. Very often when a person goes out in the street or he's at business or whatever, he'll behave himself a lot better. But when he's at home and his guard is down, so then you really see where he's holding. And that's why I think Davka the Mesilas stresses here that he was never makpid. Even he was never makpid. He not only didn't shout, he said, but he was officious, he says. I don't think that's a good translation. He never got angered, annoyed. And I never paced, I never walked in front of one who was greater than me. Now here he points out, we're not just talking about somebody who's the Gadol Ador, we're not just talking about a big rabbi. He never walked in front of somebody who was greater than him in either midas or in Torah knowledge. I never meditated, I never had thoughts of Torah, I never had divrei Torah in my mind when I was in unclean places. And I never walked 4 amos without talis and tefillin. Now, this is an interesting idea because it's everybody according to their level. A person has to understand that if he's recognizable as a Jew at some level, he has a job to be Mekadesh Shem Shemayim, to sanctify the name of God, and he has the potential, Chalila, to, God forbid, to desecrate the name of Hashem. In the case of the Amoraim, different stories about, as one of these here is that it said that Rabbi Zera said, if I was a person, people look at me, and if I'm not wearing Torah, if I'm not saying Divrei Torah, I'm not thinking in Torah, if I'm not wearing tefillin, talis and tefillin, that on my level is considered the Chil Hashem. Each one of us on our level. I remember the first time I was in New York City, and I decided I was going to wear a couple. So I went into this, Jewish bookshop somewhere on the Midtown, I think. And, I walked in there, and there's this, at the end of the counter, there's this great carousel of Jewish headgear. All kinds of things there, leather ones and knitted ones and cotton ones and black ones and ones that looked like they came off the head of an Afghan sheep herd. And without really thinking too much, I sort of walked in and picked up this big black couple and stuck it on the top of my head, paid for it, and went out to the street. The world had changed. The world had changed. I said, I've become an ambassador. I'm now an ambassador for the Jewish people. And whatever I do, it's not going to be, it'll be seen through the lens of my Jewishness. And if I push in line in the 7-Eleven store or whatever, it won't be who's this guy pushing in line. It's going to be who's this Jew pushing in line. Or if I get up for some old lady on the subway, if old ladies still venture onto the subway, I don't know if they still do, but if I were to get up and give something, so I'm a Mekadesh Shem Shemayim. I always try when I'm on a plane, because I'm quite tall, so I always try and sort of see if there's some rather short Chiloni lady struggling with a suitcase to get into the overhead compartment. I can bound over there and say, excuse me, madam, and just be Mekadesh Shemayim in front of a couple of hundred people. So a person has an opportunity and has an obligation, if you look like a Jew, to behave like a Jew. There's a story, I remember Rav Nota Schiller, Zeichat Tzaddik Livracha, Shiva used to tell us about there was an Orthodox Jew sitting in a railway compartment, I think it was, and there was, there was this newspaper article about some Jews who had been caught for embezzlement or something, some white-collar crime. So the conversation got going, and he said he was an Orthodox Jew, and they said, well, what about these guys? And he said, well, look at them, they've got a nice long beard like you. He said, yes, but under their beard they were unshaven. So a person has to understand that, we're judged, and rightly so. I remember when I first got a car here in Eretz Israel, so I realized that I really hadn't changed my style of driving much over the past 50-odd years, 45 years. And so I made myself a little sign, and I put it on the dashboard saying, you look like a rabbi, are you driving like one? So that sort of slowed me down a bit. Just examples of the idea. And all of us in the room on our level have to understand that we're representing the Rabbeinu Shalom. And this may not even be the level of Chassidus. This is something that a person, I think, is aware of, should be aware of, and as much as possible should, because to make the name of Hashem beloved in the mouths of people is the part of the mitzvah of loving Hashem, is to make Hashem also, Hashem's name should be blessed on the mouths of people in the world. So that's the idea of I never walked without Torah and Tefillin, Daled Amos. I never slept or napped in the shul, and I never rejoiced in my neighbor's misfortune, and I never called my friend by his nickname. We spoke about this before, the idea of a kinui, a nickname. Tosfos, according to Tosfos, is also even to give somebody a nickname which is not disparaging. For sure, you shouldn't call somebody shorty or fatty or whatever, but even if, could be even to shorten their name and call somebody Benny, according to the Shita, you should maybe make a adin, but he never called anybody by anything less than his full name. So these are all the kinds of chasidus that were mentioned above. And we go further, and it says in Bava Kama Daf Lamed Amud Aleph, Rabbi Yehuda said, if a person wants to be a chosid, let him fulfill, he should be Makayim, the laws of, brachas. Now, clearly, what does that mean? If he wants to be a chosid, he should be Makayim, the laws of brachas, because a bracha is mechuyev. A bracha is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, except for benching grace after meals, and could be the first bracha of Birkas HaTorah. But the vast majority, and there are a lot of them, of brachas are the Rabbanim, but they're a chiyuv. So what does that mean? That if a person wants to be a chosid, that he should be Makayim mili de brachas? So two pshatim I saw here. One is that, and I think we spoke about this in previous weeks, but it's worth repeating it. A bracha is something that very often, by virtue of the fact that we say them all the day, mitzvahs of noshim melamuda, a person becomes habituated, familiarity breeds contempt, and we don't realize what a powerful thing it is to say a bracha. How much blessing we draw down into our lives. I'm sure you've seen these posters that people have put up just for the bracha of Asher Yotza, to have a person should have an understanding and think about the miracles. One of the Gedolim of the previous generation said that if a person understood exactly what was going on in his body at the time when he was able to rid the waste from his body, he'd write home, probably send an email nowadays and said, it worked. The fact that this works day in, day out, and that our heart pumps hundreds of millions of times throughout our lifetime without stopping, on all of these things which we take for granted. Kol neshima neshima, kol neshama neshama, every single breath is another breath which is given, that our body is given to us. Another idea is that if you think about the body contains acids and alkalis which are so strong and so powerful that they should theoretically burn through tissue, and they don't. Everything is contained in the correct place in the body, and yet it's a powerful chemical engine. Another idea of the chokhmah, of the wisdom of Hashem in the body, Yitzadam b'chokhmah, is this idea that if you think about it, everything is done automatically. A person doesn't have to think, I'm going to raise my... Just think about every time you wanted to raise your hand, you would have to give a conscious command, I need to raise my right hand, I need to move my middle finger. I mean, if you think of it, and you would have to be responsible, not just for the things that you do voluntarily, but the automatic things in your body. I have to breathe, my heart pump, muscles flex, digestion digest. If you were a person, it would be impossible for a person to actually live if he had to supervise and be mashkiach on every single function that his body was doing all the time. Another idea, another understanding of Hashem's wisdom. So that's just one bracha. And every bracha is this way of bringing down into our lives blessing. The word bracha is from brecha, which is a pool, which we understand that Hashem is bringing down. In the time of David HaMelech, Bochrim were dying, and David HaMelech instituted 100 brachas every day, because a bracha comes from the lashon brecha, which is all the ni, berach, which is to acknowledge, to bow down. It's a pool, an overflowing pool that brings into our lives all kinds of blessing and health and everything that we're doing. And of course, we forget about it. My kids have a joke when you want to say, what is it? The blessing on fruit, bracha to Hashem Elokeinu melech olam borei peri. So they say brachta prat. So that's what comes out a lot of the time, brachta prat, or whatever it is. Just like this. And really, there's whenever a person says a bracha, he should have in mind when he says the Shem Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei. Before he says the name, he should think that Hashem is Adon HaKol, he's the master of everything. Everything that's going on in the world is supervised and regulated and orchestrated by Hashem. And that he is Haya, Hova, V'yiyah, he was, he is, and he will be. And that doesn't just mean that he exists within time, but there is no time without him. He's beyond time. And that's the kavanah for Hashem, Elokeinu, that he's Bala Koichos, master of all the powers and possibilities. So these are things that lechatchila a person should say every time he says a bracha. And we don't. And maybe, like it's a good thing in Elul just to take one bracha, maybe Hashayotza, or maybe whatever what you want, or maybe the Oraisa, because take a siddur. I know a beautiful story about somebody, if I can remember it correctly, and there was somebody who was a Jew in the war, and see if I can get it, if I remember it correctly, he was in the camp, and the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, gave him a spoon, and they said they want him to dig a hole in the ground, which was 5 foot deep by 5 foot by 5 foot, with this spoon. They were going to come back in half an hour, clear, and if they didn't, they were going to kill him. And somebody came along with a truck and emptied out a whole bunch of potatoes next to him, for some reason or other. And these Russian workers came along and they were starving, and they said, could they take the potatoes? He said, yes, if you dig me a hole in the ground. So they dug him a hole, and the Germans came back. He couldn't believe it. From that moment, he was makabel upon himself to always bless on food and use a siddur whenever he said Birkas Hamazon. So as I say, these are things that get really, milid the brachas doesn't mean that you say the bracha. You have to say the bracha. What it means is that you say the bracha with kavanah, that you really do it lechatchila in the best possible way. Now that even could be something that in many situations is me'ika adin, that may be not even midas chasidus, but on our level, I think even if we could say just one bracha a day, take one bracha, and say it with that kavanah slowly and think about what it is and the benefit that Hashem is showering me with. This, I think, would change our lives completely. Another idea before we close about this idea of brachas is that the story I saw of Rabbi Shlomo Zalman, yes, the story of Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he would always have tremendous. He was the Posek Ador, one of the two Poskim Ador with Shalom Eliyoshev Zatzal, and he would have tremendous hanor when somebody would come and ask him a shaila, like a complicated shaila about brachas. Most of the time we're not so poskim, but if you sometimes you see the intricacy and the depth and the beauty of how a posek will approach an idea. This is the whole idea of milid the brachas, to go into brachas, to understand the gedorim, the situations of brachas. This is another idea where we can be makayim the chasidus part of brachas. It's not just saying a bracha, it's having the kavanah of the bracha and understanding how far and how beautiful all of the blessings that we've been given to be able to express our thanks to Hashem, and by doing this, to bring ourselves close to Him. Okay.